So will you pen test a firewall or a honeypot or an IDS? Certainly to check their effectiveness, yes. You should see if they actually detect your activity and report properly. So let's take a look. To pen test, including firewalls and honeypots, you want to scan available ports to try to detect the firewall. The firewall should note this. You try to execute banner grabbing to detect firewall services if possible. And it's not you. It will be whatever tool you use. If you think that your firewall is not natting, and you'll know that because you're sure that there are devices behind it and yet you get no response, try to firewalk to see if you can get past just pure routing firewall rule sets and discover networks behind the firewall. For honeypot pen testing, you could try to overflow the honeypot's log with too much activity, like a denial of service. You could suspect a host that has too many open ports, ports that belong to different operating systems, or is too easy to exploit. You know, hosts that are facing the internet should not be easy to exploit unless somebody is really stupid. But Shodan.io is your good friend too, because it'll show you if it's a real device. If I see a device facing the internet with all kinds of open ports, not just 80 or 443 or a few of the well-known ones, but like all kinds of ports, or I see it with ports that I expect from both Windows and Linux, like 135, TCP 135, no Linux device, unless it's a decoy, will ever have that port open. That is purely Microsoft. Same thing with TCP 111. No Microsoft device will ever have that open. I see a device with both of those, that is totally suspect. I see too many ports. I see ports that belong to different OSs. If it looks just too easy, it's probably a decoy right there. So that will tip you off. So if it's just too easy, if it has too many open ports, ports that just don't logically go together, that's probably a honeypot. You can use a variety of tools to detect the honeypot, including our old friend Shodan. For IDS and firewall evasion, you're going to need to try IP address spoofing, fragmentation attacks, use proxies to access blocked websites if you're going outbound, try to hide traffic inside of ICMP, TCP ACKs, HTTP, or SSH tunnels. See if you can access the corporate network. Try to do a man-in-the-middle attack. I mean, just an encrypt. Well, encryption is the one thing that will definitely get past IDS and firewalls. You could try inserting data into something. You could try whatever evasion technique. Do a denial of service. Try to obfuscate your data. Now, of course, there will be tools that will do this. Try to generate all sorts of false positives. Try to have sessions that are split with split packet fragments that have to be reassembled elsewhere. Try to obfuscate your data using Unicode and fragments that overlap or assemble or don't assemble. Try some time to live attacks and invalid reset packets and urgency flags, and try to use shell codes that will constantly change themselves, or shell codes that just look like ASCII, or attacks at different layers, like at the application layer, especially encryption and flooding. And try to execute attacks before or after a connection. Basically use IDS and firewall testing tools. So let's review what we know. Intrusion detection will inspect inbound and outbound traffic for suspicious patterns. Network intrusion detection is basically a sensor on the network. Host-based intrusion detection will detect internal system events like the access of files and the changing of policy and the changing of the registry, including auditing events. Firewalls can be software or hardware-based, and they prevent unauthorized access. A honeypot basically attracts and traps malicious attackers and gathers information on them. Port scanning, firewalking, banner grabbing are all techniques used to try to identify a firewall. and they'll be used by your firewall detector, your firewall scanner. Attackers can try to probe services to detect the presence of a honeypot, and we saw a number of tools that'll do that. And you can do IDS and firewall and honeypot pen testing to help evaluate just these capabilities on the network. So let's get on to Lab 17, where we are attacking firewalls, IDS, and honeypots.